So, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for Nurturing the Developing Brain, a pathway toward health, learning, and resilience. Every child's brain holds an incredible capacity for growth, yet that potential doesn't always show up in the way that we expect. Sometimes it looks like the child's restless, they're sensitive, they're struggling. But beneath those challenges that see and we may label as challenges, the brain's doing something truly extraordinary. It's protecting, it's adapting, and it's searching for balance. What once looked like limits can really become doorways to hidden strengths and lasting potential when we understand how to support the brain's natural design for growth. That's what today is about. We're going to look at what happens during the first critical decade of life when the brain is building its foundation for learning, regulation, and resilience, and how experiences, relationships, and even sound help shape the pathways that define who we become. This conversation is going to expand the way you think about development and show how much power we have to nurture the brain in ways that last a lifetime. So, I really can't imagine a better person to guide us through this conversation than our guest, Dr. Valerie Nowinski. Dr. Nowinski is a developmental pediatric neuropsychologist and really one of the true pioneers in the field of neurodevelopment. For more than 40 years, she's devoted her life to understanding how the brain grows, learns, and heals, helping families, educators, clinicians translate that science into real world progress. She's the founder of the Child Foundation, the Child Health Initiative for Learning and Development. It's an organization that's dedicated to bringing neuroscience education and practical tools to families and schools. Her work spans brain electrophysiology, literacy, and systems biology, and her research and clinical practice have touched lives, countless lives, hundreds, thousands throughout her career. Children diagnosed with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, learning differences, and so much more. Dr. Nowinski is a valued member of our scientific advisory board, and she's been one of our most trusted colleagues for many, many years. In fact, I was just reflecting, Val, on the first time that we met as speakers at a neurodevelopmental conference in Chester, Great Britain, almost 30 years ago now. And, for over 20 years, you integrated the listening program, into your neuropsych practice, working with your clients, and, using music and rhythm to support the same systems that underlie, and support attention, regulation, and learning. What really makes Dr. Nowinski extraordinary is really the combination of her intellect and her heart. And you're going to see that shine through today. She helps us not just see that the brain is not something to fix, but something to nurture. It's living in an adaptable system for growth. On a personal note, I just want to share how deeply grateful I am to have Val today. I'm getting emotional because she is a great mentor to me. She's been a bright light in my career and in our work, and it's an honor to have you, Val. So thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you very much, Alex, and such an indeed genuine pleasure to be here and also with all of you, audience. So looking forward to this lovely journey today. Alex, your words are very kind, but in truth, I have tremendous respect for you and your ABT team. Your understanding of the neurophysiology of sound, music, and how it resonates, keeping healthy bodies and healthy minds and healthy hearts has touched people international around the world. So it is indeed my pleasure, okay, to be here with all of you and talk about children, their ability to learn, and their wonderful potential to thrive with well-being.
Yeah. And one thing I fail to share, but Val and I both share a thing in common, and they're different generations, but we're both three generations in families involved in these fields of medicine, rehabilitation, neurotherapy. Val's family really pioneers, starting with her father and continuing on with her own children. So just such a wealth of knowledge. And Dr. Nowinski, you've often said that sometimes we see as a child's challenge is really the brain's way of protecting itself. which I think is a pretty profound statement. So, can you take us inside that process? How does the developing brain adapt in those early years? And why understanding that, how does that change everything we know about how we nurture growth of the brain and learning?
Absolutely. It- the brain is a remarkably protective organ, as you said. Okay, and it has a beautiful, intricately woven design. Okay, and it is the gatekeeper. It's the control mechanism, but it's highly connected from head to toe. All right. So we'll talk about this beautiful system and this design with billions of brain cells, but trillions of connections. And remember that the brain is the only organ that learns beyond genes. The other organs need the brain to do that. Okay. And it can develop tremendous potential if we know what we're looking at, if we understand the system and its design. It is very powerful for us to know how to respond to what we are observing, okay, and what we're trying to teach children and what they're learning. So the best way to talk about a lot of science in a very practical matter, which I've always tried to do. It's very important to bring plain talk to science. And it helps me understand things too. But they, the neck down behaviors that we observe in children are more readily understood by people. They're observable most of the time, right? So you can hear, you can see them breathing, their hearts are beating, they're digesting, and think of it as vital organ health. But then part of that system is also joints and muscles, okay, and bones, okay. So some voluntary, some involuntary behaviors, all right. So think of there's three major systems. So the bottom system controls, let's say, neck down. Today we're going to talk quite a bit about cranial nerves because cranial nerves are brain nerves, right? And they are mostly talking head and neck, but these nerves flow through spaces in the bottom of the skull and connect to the body. So this is a working relationship from head to toe, millisecond precision timing, and no area is working in isolation. It's working together. But above the system that innervates and energizes the neck down, okay, is this middle brain that allows for our wake states. But before we even get to that, I should say the top of the part that deals with vital organs, if you move up in the brain a little bit, you're dealing with instinctive behaviors. So your sleep states, okay, your body temperature, food getting, appetite, instinctive behaviors, right? But when you move up, the brain needs a way, this middle brain, to deal with external world, right? So you have your inner reception and then you have external reception. It's through our sense organs. So every time you hear, see, taste, smell, touch, smell, the snap, 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 all these neurons start to talk to each other. But they need regulation too. Not just does the heart have to beat at a certain beat per minute and have brain body beats, but the brain needs beats. It needs, resonance through all the senses. But this middle brain, especially in humans, is very connected to the mood brain. Okay, it is right there in the center, the mood brain and the insula. And our thalamic sensory systems and the insula and the mood, they are married to each other. And when our sensory system is regulated and our moods are regulated, depending on what we're doing at the time, because sometimes we need more on and more off, but when they are more regulated, okay, then we're able to focus better. We're able to attend better. We're able to hold in memory better. And as that's happening, and remember, it's always happening together, all right? It's not that this is the higher brain, the middle brain, the lower brain works separately. It's all together. So as we're more regulated and our mood is regulated, the higher brain, the cortex, that the back receives information, the front expresses it, okay? And then the highest level of information, thinking, our ability to organize and plan and execute information is all on this higher brain, right? And that becomes more regulated, okay? So you receive sound, images, touch, mood, everything stays more regulated. But you can develop then speech and language and more complex movement and then judgment and organization and planning. So And we'll talk a lot about this system, but it's a system of great design, and every behavior tells us something. So some of these behaviors are they're all observable, and some they're observable. We have no idea where they're coming from. For example, if a child having breathing problems, we can stay, it's important to us and it elicits a response because you love your child, okay? But you also stay regulated because you know you're able to do something a little bit more about it, okay? Because it tells you something, you understand it, okay? If the heart is beating or they have an allergic reaction or they have a cold or a flu and their mood starts to get, we all get moody when we're not feeling well. But then these behaviors become observable and understandable. When certain behaviors, particularly of the sensory system, that is going on and off and on and off, and sometimes it's regulated, and we can really understand that children are focusing well, their mood is good, they just feel good, they're able to socially adapt better, and other times there are behaviors where they are just over the top, and adults that can happen to us too, but when we're over the top and they're yelling and screaming and impulsive and biting sometimes, okay, and like, what is going on? I can't pick up what in the world happened. Many parents would often say to me over the years, Dr. Val, they look like they're aliens. I mean, we don't know what happened. All I did was say good morning, and they said, for what? You know? Yeah. But please know that even when you see these behaviors, the brain is trying to protect itself and is trying to find a balance and a harmony, and it can't. And and does it also have an impact then to that higher brain, right? I often call, which is an interesting statement, the ability to feel regulated of our sensory system, as I said, mostly controls attention, memory, and mood. So I call attention, memory, and mood the three amigos. And the three amigos have a very close friendship in life, right? And you want them to have a close friendship, okay? But sometimes they're really dysregulated and we really don't know why. So we're going to talk about how to better understand that, how to bring them some harmony. And sound, all senses are very important. We'll talk about all of them. But sound is unbelievably powerful in the human brain and does affect whole brain, whole body function. And that's the beauty of the biomodulation, the neurophysiology of ABTs, listening programs, all biomodulation. But sound and the technology that you use, Alex, and I've used the listening program I've brought it to hospitals who they find somebody to get certified and then they show it to the rest of their staff, crisis centers, schools, and obviously parents, right, and families. And it helps to regulate head to toe. And that's the beauty of it. It's not just listening. We all love music, but scientifically done sound, okay, is powerful for brain. All right. That's why I love talking about this. All right. But we'll talk about all senses. But again, the summary of that, as we talk about these three vital areas in the system and what turns them on and what turns them off, know that it is telling us something. So consequently, in summary of this intro, we need to step back. Adults, there's no greater gift than service to our children, right? Parents, we love them. We want them to be healthy. Our educators who want to be able to help them learn and thrive. Our health professionals listening, okay? We love children. We want them to grow with health and well-being. A society that embraces that adapts with health and well-being. So we're going to talk about all of that, but it is protective. Even though it doesn't look protective, it is.
Dr. Val, I think we could stop right there today. And just as usual, you're so eloquent and have such a love for the human nervous system and your ability to kind of describe it in such an impactful way. Still, after all these years of hearing you speak, I pick up something new each time. So thank you. And
You're welcome.
before
Right back to
we
you, Alice.
So before we continue, you brought up the listening program, so I want to touch briefly on that as it ties in today's theme on brain development and the role of sound.
Mhm.
So as we know, the auditory system's one of the first sensory systems to fully develop in utero. By around 24 weeks, the fetus can hear. Sound is the brain's first language, and it continues throughout our lifetime to shape our focus, our emotion, and our learning. And every sound we hear is training the brain. It's helping it to decide what's important, what's unimportant. It helps it organize, to regulate. Sound really helps us make sense of our world, where we are in the world and what's happening in the world around us, and are we in fact safe in that environment that we're in. But when those pathways aren't processing sound efficiently, it affects our attention, the ability to read, our communication, emotional regulation in particular. So, the listening program we created to strengthen those pathways in a very gentle and structured way. It uses acoustically modified music that we've composed, recorded, and produced in a very, very specific process to help the brain process sound with greater accuracy and ease. And over time, what we see is listeners move from this state of overwhelm, stress, sensory overload to one of safety, of calm, of clarity, of connection. And then learning, communication, and confidence begin to build on top of that. So, with each listening experience, it's designed around precise frequency and timing patterns that engage this whole brain, as Dr. Val was describing. And we describe those through what are four color coded frequency training zones. So, the blue zone, which is all of the frequencies for our focus, our presence, our overall well being. Green, which are the lower tones for calm, grounding, safety, sensory, balance, stress regulation. Orange, the middle frequencies of communication for language and social connection, and then the higher frequencies where we tap into our creativity, our spirituality, our independence, our curiosity, our executive functions. So the programs move systematically through these zones, stimulating and nurturing these pathways to support all these areas that Dr. Val's been describing. And listening sessions are generally 15 or 30 minutes daily, 5 days a week, done with waves, air, and bone conduction headphones, which deliver sound not only through the ear cups in the ears, but general vibrations through the body. This helps integrate what the ear is hearing with what the body's feeling, strengthening that brain body connection every moment. So, what makes this approach unique is we're not asking the listener to work harder, concentrate more, to do anything. It simply gives the brain input it needs to organize and grows naturally through its elegant design. So, when we're nurturing the brain through the listening program, we're not just improving how it processes information, but we're helping it find its natural rhythm that we need to function in daily life. So, Val, as we think about this first decade of life and what's happening inside of the brain, why are those early years so foundational?
Okay. Well, they start actually during fetal development. Remember, I talked about 12 pair of cranial nerves, brain nerves. And these nerves energize head to toe. Okay, but they originate in the brain from that first middle section down of the vital organs to the sensory system to all of that wonderful thinker. So think of it physical, neck down, attention, memory, mood, thinker. Okay. And from the early few weeks of fetal development, those nerves are connecting, as you mentioned, with the ones with sound. We can hear low frequency sound at 18 weeks of gestation, right? And as you said very profoundly, Alex, even by 20, 29 weeks especially, the fetus is sensing the mother's voice, the heartbeat, stomach sounds, okay? And what goes on in that outside world and the internal world is affecting the fetus, right? But by the end of fetal development, that fetus, that child is ready to be born and play a role in its birth. But to do that, we have to step back for a minute and say, well, how does out in the world that happens? All right. How do these nerves talk to each other? What is causing it to happen? Right. And there's many mediums that energize the brain, right? We're energy fields, right? And motion is so important. Motion is a combination of this. sense organ that receives information, but it has to be expressed, right, through movement, right? And motion involves that, all right? And remember, you often hear, keep moving, move it or lose it, okay? Even in the fetus, that amniotic sac is so protective, right? It starts early on and it protects the child and it allows for motion. And as the fetus is growing and there's more coordinated movement, so when that stretch becomes a grasp, okay, and they're ready to help to be born. Motion has movement, it has velocity. You have distinct movement, change in movement, and when you change movement, you accelerate, right? So, motion. Think about it as this wonderful bass that turns all senses on and off. And sometimes motion, and today we'll talk the speed of sound and motion, but all senses can be too on or too off, right? They need to be in sync depending on what we're doing at the time. So if we want to sleep, they need to be down. We'll talk about brain waves and all of that in a little bit, but they need to be down, right? If we're running a marathon, they better be going a little bit more. Okay. If we're trying to study, we're trying to read, right? We're trying to hug, we're trying to fight because something is happening. Okay. We need regulation. Again, the regulation of the senses in motion, when we can allow for better regulation, there's always better health. Nerve growth factor. Rita Multicini won a Nobel Prize in the 80s, remember, on nerve growth factor. And she found, okay, that when the system is more regulated, and more and more that's been replicated and replicated, when we are in states of regulation, brain cells grow more efficiently. Okay. There's never, there's so much talk about how many cells we have. I mean, cells will grow and they're going to prune and they're going to die off. So we never really know exactly how many. But we have literally trillions of connections. So that's what's important. You have these wonderful cells and nerves talking and energizing the whole system through motion. And sounds need to move, light needs to move, your body temperature, and your sleep, your heart, all the beats, right? So the mental beats of the brain and the sensory system are not always as understood as the body beats, as we said earlier, right? But they are the core because this middle brain connects, it is a gatekeeper. It is connecting the lower brain and your body function with the higher brain. So the more we keep it connected. So are there times when behaviors, as children grow, because they're growing tremendously this first 10 years of life. Brain waves are becoming more mature, okay? Your whole system is becoming more mature, right? So the heartbeat alters itself to more maturation. The breaths alter to more maturation. But so does the sensory system. But the sensory system is sometimes hard to read, right? Okay, but because it's connected to this mood brain, we are born infants are born with a startle reflex on purpose. It's very protective. Okay. They don't know how to handle the world yet. Okay. And when something happens that is too much for them, they startle. Okay. And it's the cue to the parent to say, oh, I better lower my voice. I better calm my touch. Okay. I better lower the light. Okay. Light, dark, no matter where you live in the world, light awakens us, dark closes our eyes more, as well as sound, etc. So that behavior of infants and that startle needs to also become more even, right? And life happens. And when life happens, sometimes that startle is on and we just are fighting because we go into a fight and sometimes we need that, but sometimes it can be overdone. Sometimes we flee and that flight, it can be an average one, and other times it can lead to much, much distance. And I've often written on autism and pervasive developmental disorders of the brain the children, these lovely, lovely children, are driven to distance, some at a high functioning level, some more severe. It's the same with the heart. You can have more severe light problems, the lung, and again, those are more observable. But the sensory system, the more it's dysregulated and we're driven to distance. So we not only startle, but now we can flee, we can fight, we can freeze. There are children, they feel like they're paralyzed. Okay, when we're sometimes in trauma, we freeze, all right, or we fight. But we can also friend, right? Often, all right? And so we have to know how to do all of that, and it has to be regulated. Okay. But again, because life happens and the sensory system is harder to read in children, when these I've helped and I've worked with I've learned more from children than they will ever learn from me, folks, and I mean that genuinely. Okay. Children's behaviors tell us a lot, okay? But as adults in their world, we need to step back and understand this so we stay regulated, right? And the more regulated we are, the people we love stay regulated, and vice versa. But there are kids who have developed major infections called PANDAS, these pediatric, they're autoimmune disorders, neuropsychiatric disorders associated with an infection of strep. Then you can have kids who just have acute neurological problems that are unseen and they're caused by either something in the body or something in their outside world, but it is causing a trauma to their system. And their behaviors um, uh, actually, I'll talk about this. There's a beautiful video out called My Child Is Not Crazy. If you want to write that down, it's kind of an odd title, but it is so generally done because it's with professionals, but parents who tell their story of how much they love their children, but they landed up having some type of infection or other incident, and they're biting the parents and screaming and kicking and out of the blue, and then the next moment they're coming, and then the next minute, or they're tics and their bodies showing all sorts of irregular movements, and you feel for everyone because the child is driven to distance and the parents are trying to hug, and um, so I'm giving that as an example that can the system be really overdone? Yes. Acute trauma does that, whether it's to the the body, neck down, to the sensory system, or the higher brain. We'll talk about dyslexia because no matter how brilliant you are, somebody can have dyslexia, and it doesn't feel good if they're trying to finish a test and they can't. Okay.
Right.
I'll give you some beautiful case examples. And because I've been in the field so long, I still get beautiful calls from people, wonderful notes from people who've just kind of followed me over time and share their stories and their success stories. And I'll share some of those. They're very, very powerful. Um,
Well, let's take a moment, Val. I just, I think, for all of us to hear what you're describing through the story of a child just cements that understanding so much deeper. Can you maybe
yeah,
share, one of your clients,
sure.
kind of
Yeah,
their level of dysregulation,
absolutely.
maybe a process you facilitated with them, perhaps using sound and rhythm, and
Yeah. Yes.
and kind of how they blossomed.
Okay. Well, there are many,
I
many.
know.
I'm blessed to have seen them. Um, So let's I'll do it by thinking about the different level of difficulty, right? So I there are kids that with milder attention deficits and learning problems and mood problems, and there are kids with more serious, significant. They're all serious, but significant, and then you have the very traumatic ones. As far as a traumatic one, so there's let's just call I'm going to use different names. Let's just call him Timmy, okay? And so Timmy, who now, in his 40s, and I still see Timmy actually. Timmy's parent, Timmy gestures a lot for his parents to bring him around me, and sometimes we just see each other, okay, and there's peace.
Mm.
But Timmy was born blind, okay. They didn't know that until shortly after birth when they realized that something was wrong. But he was born blind. Remember, it's 40 years ago or more. He's 40 something. Okay. Very severely developmentally delayed, labeled the severe autism spectrum. But remember, any pervasive disorder of the brain is being called autism, all right? Because it is pervasive, but it has multiple etiologies. So the more we understand why and what's going on in the child's brain, the better you can help them be all they can be, all right? And so blind, very developmentally delayed, and doesn't and does have some sound and speech, okay, especially when he's regulated. So we'll talk about that, okay. Um, but you can imagine those parents, loving, loving parents, these parents, and their journey early on, trying to help this child regulate because his mood brain was so sensitive. Okay. But he wasn't having, he had movement, but he could not, see light wasn't affecting him to have more motion. And he said it's interesting because he can explain that there's like little flashing lights that he hears, but he doesn't have full vision. But anyway, Lighthouse for the Blind has been very helpful for him. Um, Many programs. Okay. This young man loves headphones, and I introduced him to the listening program. Started seeing him when he was, a couple years old. Okay. So he's one of the longer term people that I've seen blossom over time. And is he intellectually delayed, quote unquote? Um, but is he connecting with his family and people who know how to approach him, who know to observe his behaviors and know when to touch and when not to touch, and very good people that he's held in memory that feel good to him. He allows to touch. That didn't happen for a long time. Okay. But when he listened to the listening program, Alex, everybody, he needed it because it resonated sound for him, and sound was so important to him. And when he was listening, his parents said, Dak, this is a gift to us because he lets us touch him, he lets us hug him. Okay. He uses a little bit more sound in his presentation. He starts to it's actually interesting because he repeats phrases now, and he can do that for a long time. There's not a lot of its own executive expression, right? But through sound and music, you should see when there's motion and his movement is bopping and he's paying attention to sound, he's calmer, he's more focused, he connects. Well, this is what we're asking for in life, right? So, I don't think a day goes by that they don't use the listening program. Okay. And other music. It's interesting because he loves Mongolian throat singing. Okay. Throat singing is vibrant.
Which is an acquired taste, but it's powerful.
And it's low vibration, and it brings
Yeah.
calm to him. Okay. He loves drumming, which is similar, right? Okay. And the listening program has much of this up and down sound, right? But so I immediately thought of him in one of the more pervasive, because has he grown with serious conditions, but he's loved, he's cared about, he's nurtured, he's happy. He's a very happy, happy boy, and he's actually knowing how to calm himself more with all of this, and he moves to some
Beautiful.
new way to do it. So he's just a lovely, lovely child, or young man now.
So speaking of, so using Timmy as an example, which is a profound example. And what I'm hearing is that through the listening program, he found a sense of safety and became more open and aware and connected and would co-regulate better with those in his environment with whom he felt a sense of safety. And
Absolutely.
I mean, that's beautiful. So, from your experience, Val, and you've described rhythm as the body's natural regulator. What's happening in the brain when we begin to see what we would call this disorganization come into more organization and balance and connectedness?
There's more resonating peace among the cells and the nervous system, right? It is not so on and so off. So if you think about it this way, this middle brain that is the core now, okay, because you need the resonance of some calm and relaxed alertness and peace, and sometimes over the top, but mostly calm and safety. So we connect more. So what happens is you actually start to see nerve growth factor. And from a research model, you see brain waves become more efficient. Okay, body chemistry. So you have remember, we're electrical chemical beings. Our cells need electrical chemical activity, which allow for all that motion, right? Not to be too on, not to be too off. So you start to see more of rhythmic brain waves. Okay, but in a person level, connected level, you start to see the higher brain get more activated. So because when we can attend and we can hold in memory, we process better. Okay. And our hearts start to beat better, our lungs start to breathe better, we digest better. It becomes a whole working brain, right? So we begin to see much more health and well-being. And when we have health and well-being, we adapt better. Remember that when we learn all this regulation, Aristotle said learning was the greatest of all pleasures. Okay, and learning how to understand the whole brain is a tremendous pleasure, right? And and we want adaptation. Remember, Einstein said a society that adapts with health and well being is one that can be aware of people and connect. Okay. So, as the system is working and organizing, if it's done with regulation, we adapt better and we adapt with all head to toe health and well being better. And we become social beings. That's why Timmy, who was disconnected big time from his world, has a social connection to him. When he's at his different organizations that help him, he knows who to sit by, who to connect with. He has loving parents, very connected with, and sisters, so you see much of this. But, um, and again, it starts during fetal development, okay, and then throughout life. But another way to really understand maybe this regulation is that it follows a law of strength. Okay. To remember, a strong stimuli brings a strong response, and a weak stimuli should bring a weak response. And when we're regulated, that happens. That when you say, "What?" we get more organized then. Okay. And in mood, attention, memory. So young children, the first 10 years of life, are not many adults, okay, who hopefully have had much more higher level learning to be able now to affect the mood and the body function. Remember, as we grow, we think by recollection. Children, the first years of life, particularly early childhood, they learn by repetition.
Yeah.
Then they learn by recollection, and then they learn by reflection. Adults, we have the gift to learn by some reflection, some better than others, but we use our higher brain. So this law of strength in the waking state through our senses has much power. Okay, but when it gets to the higher brain, those areas that I call the thinker that we talked about now go downward, right? And they energize the rest of the body. So it activates, you have ascending, descending reticular formation that keeps the system under control. When life happens to any part of the brain body, that law of strength is broken. So sometimes the strongest of stimuli brings an unbelievable weak response. And the parent said, "Well, I just told you over and over and over." And I go, "Oh, I don't know what you said." It was gone. All right. Or the slightest of touch brings this rave response. Okay. And sometimes you can't read that and it's hard to read, but knowing this hopefully helps us first say, it is telling us something. All right. No sensory self. So when you say, what is it doing? The sensory, we're moving more. All senses are moving with motion, and motion starts all communication, right? And brain growth and cell growth. Very interestingly, even if I'll talk about some of my brain research study, but the interestingly, nerve growth factor, even the synapses need to talk. They need to go snap, snap, snap. They need to connect. And axons need to connect, right? Gray matter, you have the cell body, white matter, all these axons. And it's interesting because myelin, which is that fatty tissue that covers the axon, right? It is really interesting as you watch a child in regulation and electrophysiological studies are done, okay? And even some of there's diffusion tensor sensing tests now that watch water molecules in the brain. And you can actually watch, okay, when a child is in a state of more relaxation, there's much more resonance of motion and water molecules throughout the brain, and axons talk to each other more, and myelin increases, right? Myelin controls speed of the axon. The better myelin you have, the better your speed is going to be, right? And sometimes on and sometimes off. So without getting too much into all that, I just wanted to give you a snippet that this is very powerful, right? But sometimes we just don't know but we might not know what's causing it, but we can get there. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. But what can we do? We can allow the child to learn safety and regulation so they will switch gears and they will grow. And most of the time we can figure it out then. And sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can't even in the neck down. We don't know what it is. There was a, just briefly, just I had one of my 18-month-old granddaughters. I had a bunch of them over the other day, but I was giving a bath to and the 18-month-old, and she started screaming and screaming and screaming in the bathtub, and I'm like, "Oh my God, honey, you're flailing all over the place, and you're in the bathtub and you're in water. What's happening?" Okay, and remember, it elicits an visceral response in people who love children. I was like, oh. But obviously said, okay, I better stay, regulated and see what's happening, right? And she's pushing her body to her foot. Sure enough, under that protective mat you can put in the bottom of a bathtub, one of her brother, who's 4, brought his little toys, his little Hot Wheels, a bunch of Hot Wheels into the bathtub, and one was right under there on her foot, and it was pushing her
Oh,
and pushing her. So I took it out, and there she is, happy as a
there you
lark
go.
again, enjoying her bath. So I'm just that just came to me. But see, these are behaviors that they're observable, but we know, well, let me step back. And when something physically is happening, you can step back. But when it's sensory physical, it sometimes it's harder because it does elicit, and we're human as adults, right? And it elicits that response. But if we know about everything we're talking about again, and you stop and you say, and this is a very important point, it will help you to say, gee, I understand that's not willful behavior. Because
Right.
those behaviors can look very, very willful.
Yes.
Many kids, even on the spectrum, let's say the high functioning spectrum, parents will say, Doc, what is happening? Because they're in all these therapies and they're learning, they are doing well. But, you know, I have said some things over and over, and I know my child can build these complex things. So when I say to them, we just have to turn the TV off, I don't expect this huge explosion. Okay. But as they learn to say, well, but what is that explosion telling us? Okay, was it that the sound, okay, was actually easing them and they didn't want it turned off? Okay, the something, or was it, or what is it saying? And that behavior is not willful. Yeah, I can't tell you, hosts of parents have said, Doc, just holding on to those words, that I remember that it's not willful. Just like the heartbeat, the child's not making themselves have a heart problem. The child's not making themselves have an asthma attack. They're not making themselves have digestive problems. The child, they're not making themselves have this. It is not willful behavior. That has helped so many people. So even if it starts with that, you're going to be on this beautiful journey because you'll be more regulated. Does that?
Beautiful. Beautiful, Val. You have one of the things I've really enjoyed in our conversations over the years is learning what you've learned by studying, electrical physiology of clients that you've worked with, thousands of clients. We only have a few minutes, but I would like, to understand in very practical terms what has looking at neurochemical, neuroelectrical activity in the brain taught you about function? And how have you applied that in your practice and considered, tools like the listening program and what you've observed through your EEG studies in terms of brain change that lead to what really matters to us is functional change,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, in the daily life of that individual. So maybe just a quick few moments on, what have you learned through all these years of experience in running these brain studies in the children that you work with?
So, okay, it's a powerful question, Alex. But
I know there's a lot there to unpack.
a very good question, though, because our brain waves, the EEG studies will pick up how the state of regulation of the brain wave. Okay, but it functionally allows us to know. Um, is the child in more of a calm state? Is it more in a state to be able to have a strong stimulus bring a strong response so they're able to pick up a stimuli and focus, okay? Or are they having brainwave rhythms that are on but still helpful, or are they not, okay? And when does it become a little dysrhythmia that we all have because no one has perfect system? But when does that dysrhythm become a seizure, okay? And remember, the more, if you look at it on a continuum, the kids with more serious disorders in those first 10 years of life, their electrical chemical system is more fragile, right? So you see more of these behaviors, right? And in many of the kids, um, we ran electrophysiological studies and brainwave studies because we wanted to know, are you talking about a dysrhythmia or something? Because many kids were just given something chemically, but if you do that without knowing if there's an electrical problem, it's playing with some fire, especially in
Yeah.
pervasive disorders, right? So many kids at the, let's say the milder attention deficits and these lovely kids, but they're truly either hyper or hypo, and this law of strength is off, or the learning problems. They might have these dysrhythms, but they weren't seizure. Okay, some were, and some weren't. Okay, because you can have combined problems, right? Okay. But in the more serious disorders, you begin to see a higher evidence, not just of sleep and wake problems, but you get to see more electrical problem. And that's when the chemicals that you're talking about, the electrochemical process, we have chemicals that excite us, okay? Your glutamate and, your dopamine and your catecholamines, et cetera. And then you have the GABA that, keeps us on a little bit more calm, and the serotonin, et cetera, et cetera. So you begin to see more chemical transmission, but very important to understand what's going on in the body, neck down, that affects that, what happens in the sensory system that affects that, and the higher brain. I had the luxury of neuropsychological tests that picked up the timing of each of these brain areas, right? And I wish we could talk. I love talking about this. So I know we're getting out of time, but in dyslexia, I'm thinking of this wonderful youngster whose higher brain waves were going wonderfully. He was an artist like you wouldn't believe, and from early on drew these most sophisticated cars. And as an adult, he is a major. Every car company wants this young man, okay, because his design of cars,
Hmm.
more importantly, lets him connect with the world. He's a multimillionaire, but he also connects with the world. Um, that's what he wanted to do, but he couldn't read well. Okay. Sounds were coming at a different speed. So here's where, and I'm not sure on time.
We've got just a few minutes, Val.
So the best way to understand this, let's say with learning the middle, this road of some learning problems, because you can be brilliant and have great regulation and have some dyslexia, but it's important to treat. All right. The higher brain, once you get to this higher brain, is divided into zones. The visual, the auditory, the motor, the mood, the executive, it all has zones. The first zones have very quick, fast evoke potentials. Those brain you give the series of clicks and they're picking up the fast ones. Your higher level thinking and your judgment and all of that, it takes more. It takes 300 milliseconds after the onset of a stimuli. Sometimes 50 to 60 to 100 milliseconds are occurring in the fast ones. So think about it in dyslexia. The sensory system of the eyes are, if they're going really fast and you're getting light and pattern glare and your saccadic movement, your eye movement is too on or is too off, you can be brilliant, but you're going to have trouble reading. Sounds, if you pick up bat and you hear t before b, well, you're going to have problems. But when you put sound, they go through the zones and you put a sound or an image to more letters, okay? And letters have designs, and some letters have multiple sounds. It becomes even more difficult, right? But if you know how to resonate the sound of the letter, of the number, and know how to bring lines to, and there's just a book coming, or the Drina who's on here, and Dawn, very wonderful colleagues and I are writing to talk about how dyslexia is a dysynchrony. It's a dysynchrony, okay, of the sensory system. You can be brilliant and the most wonderful person. And as adults, you're allowed to be a specialist, but we don't let kids be specialists. They have to be generalists. So do we have to show them how to learn to do that? And the more we know brain, we can even help dyslexia because we know how to take care of that, right? Even though we're still kind of caught in some old learning. Okay, so I know it's time. This is a talk that we could speak for hours now, right? We're given week sessions on this, but I've so enjoyed it. Would love to answer any questions.
Well, we still have a little bit more time, Val. So,
Oh, good.
thinking about everything that you've shared today, and we have really covered the bulk of the questions that came in during registration. We've had a couple personal ones come in that will provide your email address for a couple of these individuals that have more personal questions that they can direct to you. But
Great.
as you reflect on what I would just call this great body of work, you've influenced so many educators, so many clinicians, parents, patients. What's the most important takeaway that you want to leave with our audience today? Based on all these learnings, what's the most important thing for us to be keeping in mind?
So biomodulation from head to toe, all right? Know how to understand that system to keep not just healthy hearts and digestion and breathing, because regulated breathing helps us a lot. Okay, regulated movement helps us a lot, but regulated sound. And Alex, you know how much I use. So many people have used the listening program, right? It is scientifically done with great resonance from head to toe. It becomes a brain body modulator, right? Just like there are other modulators that are used in life, right? So the takeaway is try to observe, know that they're not willful. It means that the modulation and the regulation of the system isn't doing well. It'll help us guide how to keep ourselves regulated, etc. Okay. And I wish that for everybody, right? We're all, everybody listening, it's, parents, educators, health professionals. We have service to children, right? And we all love the children. And we know, but not everybody understands that it isn't willful behavior. So as we help people understand that, I wish that for you too, and wishing you peaceful rhythm, thoughtful minds, and we become able to help children become very adaptive beings. They can be, right? They can be healthy beings. So that's a major, major takeaway. And the listening program is a wonderful, it's easy, it's fun, and it's science. And I'm not just saying that. I've experienced it with so many people. You know, they it's fun, it is easy, but it is very powerful scientifically. And I'll leave that's you and your wonderful work explains that a lot, Alex. But I've seen it touch many, many people. It's why I said, yes, I love talking with you and ABT.
Well, Val, thank you so much. And those are true pearls of wisdom. And I know there's great interest as I've been waiting for many years for this beautiful book that you, Don, and Drina are working on. What can you share in 2 minutes about the book, what we can look forward to, and maybe the timeline?
Rhythms, dyslexia is a dysrhythmia. I mean, but it's a whole brain affair. But it needs rhythm of the sensory system of sound, of images, of line formation, the various sounds of the different 44 sounds of speech, okay? And movement. You starts with motor, you need to write, you need to, you know, and I've had kids where, look at foot and mouth painters. They make you so excited. They don't have hands. I mean, they use their hands. Their mouth, their feet, not their, to draw. They draw these unbelievably, the brain can compensate. And not only does dyslexia and other conditions are we compensating, we can help them compensate, but you can help the brain grow to these other areas. So, the book talks about dysrhythms in all senses, motor, sound, visual, and even ways to make that growth, even if a child has more serious higher brain problems. But there are many, many people with gifts and brightness who just have trouble with those early cortical zones that have trouble with sensory formation. So when we do that, especially the first 10 years of life, when it lays the foundation, the brain will take over. Okay. And, and repetition goes to recollection, to reflection, and they begin to read better. Okay. And write better. Okay. But more importantly, they're much more regulated human beings. Okay. In many ways. Okay.
So, Val, what's the title of the book?
Well, I can't tell you yet.
Okay, you can't tell us yet. How about a timeline for
It's,
publication?
life happens, right? I thought in retirement, but now I'm consulting so much. But I thought in retirement I would have more time, but I am, and Gina and Donna are just wonderfully talented
Yes, they are.
educators, specialists, developmental specialists, learning specialists, and they bring a tremendous amount of breadth and depth to all of this too. And it
So
will
what
come
we'll
out.
share is when you're ready to share more details on the book and a timeline, we will make sure to share that in our Brain Notes newsletter from
Thank
Advanced Brain Technologies to make sure everyone has access to your brilliant work. Dr. Nowinski, thank you. Your insights, your compassion, your extraordinary contributions in this field. Every time we talk, I'm just reminded so much about the possibilities when we both look at the brain and those that we're working with, both with the science in mind, but leading with the heart. And I know how much you've touched the lives of those that are with us. And everyone, thank you for joining us for this
Thank you.
really important conversation. We hope you're leaving with a deeper understanding of how the brain develops, new ways to support those in your lives. And while Dr. Nowinski is retired from practice, she very generously has shared that I can share her email. If you have a specific question you believe Dr. Nowinski may be able to help you with, her email is ndcbrain@gmail.com. You can learn more about her work at childhealthlearn.org. And so those are some great resources for you. If you want to learn more, get started with the listening program, visit us at advancedbrain.com, email us at info@advancedbrain.com, or call country code 1-801-622-5676. You can also follow us on Instagram at Advanced Brain Technologies. Val, have just a wonderful day. Thank you so much for your contributions.
Thank you, and right back at you. And thank you, audience. Okay. Bye bye.
Take care. Be well, everyone.
Be well.